The House is resumed. Kia ora tātou, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Honourable members, the House, prior to the dinner break, was debating the Westpac New Zealand bill. The Honourable Member Aaron Gilmore has 6 minutes and 45 seconds remaining to speak. I invite the member to seek the call. I call the Honourable Member Brendan Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do wish to alert listeners that I'm not Aaron Gilmore. I have no wish to be Aaron Gilmore. I do not hold the range of professional qualifications or experience or high diplomatic posts that my colleague from across the chamber holds. But I would like to speak on the Westpac New Zealand bill. And I'd like to talk for a moment about the salary paid to the Chief Executive of Westpac. And of course this bill is around some technical changes allowing the Westpac Banking Corporation branch in New Zealand to comply with its condition of registration and limiting the bank's liabilities to below $15 billion as set by the Reserve Bank. And obviously the Chief Executive runs the the Westpac Bank here in New Zealand, and one would expect that gentleman to be a well-paid person. But I looked at the weekend's Herald and a table of executive pay summaries and saw that the Chief Executive of Westpac here in New Zealand, George Frazis, is the highest paid Chief Executive in the country. And that might be argued that that's appropriate. A bank of the size of Westpac is a big and major financial institution, and appropriate that the Chief Executive is well remunerated. But then I looked at the pay that George Frazis earned in 2009, and at that point he was earning the modest salary of $3.5 million, at another $1,000 or two. But by last year, his salary had risen some 67% to $5.848411. So $5.85 million, a 67% increase. And I have to say, if I was a member of the Westpac staff, and they're a good bank, and the call centre for the nation operates out of Christchurch, or it certainly did until the February 22 quake. But their average salary there is of the order of $45,000 for those people who take the calls from bank customers who are wanting to know about issues with their bank deposits and transactions. And I would feel somewhat perplexed to know that the Chief Executive of the bank is earning 100 plus times what that person answering for the bank on the front line on the counters is earning. And I'm sure that some people might think that this is around the politics of envy. But if you look at the fact that the ANZ Banking Group Chief Executive, Jenny Fagg, who runs a similar-sized operation, and her salary in 2009 was $1.2 million, so about a third of George Frazis' salary. But it did increase, I have to acknowledge, last year quite considerably. It more than doubled, in fact, to $2.840 million. So what we are actually seeing is the sort of game that goes on in industries, some industries in this country, where they play the parallel game, that I'm earning this, therefore your competitor is earning an amount, and therefore you deserve to earn that amount. And it doesn't have any relationship back to sometimes the share price. It doesn't certainly have any relationship back to the comparison with what the average company worker is earning. And some people might dismiss that as being an invalid comparison, but I think there is a deserved agreement for some form of relativity. And I think there was an early American banker, Rockefeller, I think, might have been Morgan, who said that no manager should earn more than 20 times what his staff were earning.
Point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if, given that this is a second reading, if you could draw the member back to the bill.
Well,
I didn't mention it.
okay. Thank you for that. The issue is that the member, it is rather wide-ranging, but I would ask the member to bring it back and
Thank you,
focus.
Mr Speaker. We are, of course, debating tonight the issue of the Westpac Bank and the technical changes to it, incorporating it in New Zealand. And I think that it's a good piece of legislation. It's appropriate. Labor's not opposing it. But the Chief Executive is the person in charge of Westpac New Zealand. And it is important that we note that the Chief Executive takes responsibility. He's effectively in charge of this piece of legislation once it passes through the House. He is running that organisation. He's incurring the responsibilities of running that organisation. He is responsible for managing the staff and outcomes of that organisation. And he deserves to be well remunerated. But I think it is obscene to see somebody earning of the order of 5.8%, awarding himself a 67% increase in the nation, when the average wage increase in this country through that same time frame was 1.7%. And the banks have some responsibility to this nation, because they are sometimes amongst the cheerleaders who call for fiscal restraint, for financial responsibility, and it's a case of, do as we do rather than as we say. And this is a situation where the Westpac staff, I'm sure some of whom will be watching the progress and passage of this bill tonight, have every reason to be discouraged by the fact that their Chief Executive is earning such a disparate amount, the highest earning executive of any organisation in New Zealand, and a 67% pay rise, as this bill, which presumably was originated by him and his head office, came through to the Parliament and we're now considering tonight. This bill is, of course, about a change around the ownership structure, if you like, of the Westpac Bank. It goes back to ensuring that, and we know that Westpac is a very sound and stable bank. It's acknowledged. It's operated well in this country for a long, long time. And we, of course, have had the track record of the Reserve Bank, with a policy of local incorporation of one of its key planks in ensuring the stability of the New Zealand banking sector, which one has to acknowledge did hold up well through the course of the tumult that emerged in late 2008 into 2009. And I acknowledge that the banks in New Zealand did remain stable and sovereign and able to endure the storms, and that has to be reflected in wage packages, I acknowledge. But I still come back to that point around the size and scale of the increase that Chief Executive has rewarded himself with. We have to also say, in respect of Westpac, that in 2009, we as a party, with the support of the Greens, thought it important to look at the performance of the banks through the financial crisis and the recession, and we were very disappointed that Westpac did not take the opportunity to support that inquiry. It was blocked effectively by the government, but we still held an inquiry. We thought it important that New Zealanders were able to have some look through the role of the banks in the financial collapse that had happened, and banks came through the 2008 tumult pretty darn well, but we thought that unfortunate that Westpac did not support this bill. Turning to some of the key elements around the bill, obviously what it's doing is transferring the Westpac Banking Corporation's branch in New Zealand to comply with its conditions of registration, and limiting the bank's liabilities to below $15 billion as set out by the Reserve Bank Act. And some of the history to this, of course, is that Westpac Banking Corporation is registered in New Zealand as an overseas company under the Companies Act of 1993, and then as a bank under the Reserve Bank of New Zealand Act of 1989. But from 2003 onwards, the Reserve Bank began instituting a policy requiring systematically that banks significant banks be incorporated in New Zealand. Initially, Westpac Banking Corporation established Westpac New Zealand to assume and carry on the retail banking business in New Zealand, and what this is doing is bringing that process to a finality. And legislation is, of course, the only means by which the assets of Westpac Banking Corporation's New Zealand retail business can be vested in Westpac New Zealand, and that's what this legislation is about. But let me just finish with a final comment around this issue of the Chief Executive. It is still, in my view, inappropriate in hard times when people are being told to tighten their belts, when we're seeing the prospect of a savage budget coming in just a couple of weeks' time, when New Zealanders are bracing themselves for further restraint, when they've had a wage increase in the past year of 1.7% on average, for the Chief Executive of one of the leading banks of this country to be rewarded with a salary package rise of 67% to $5.8 million at a time when the rest of the nation is being told to do it tough. And I think most particularly of the staff of Westpac and Christchurch, who are doing it extraordinarily tough at the moment. There are big questions about the Westpac call centres building in the centre of my CBD in Christchurch. Those people earn on average $45,000 a year. They have every reason to feel very disgruntled with the fact that the Chief Executive awarded himself a 67% rise.